The November rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 accusations. Luca Russo sat motionless in the black Mercedes, parked in shadows across from the abandoned warehouse on Biscayne Boulevard, his eyes never leaving the entrance. 2:47 in the morning. The clock on the dashboard glowed green, and he had been watching for 3 weeks straight. 3 weeks of following her. 3 weeks of surveillance that made no sense. Vinny shifted in the passenger seat, rain dripping from his dark wool coat onto the Italian leather. 23 years working for Luca, and he knew better than to speak unless invited. The silence in the car was like a held breath. The warehouse door swung open. Allara Hartley emerged into the downpour, soaked through her thin jacket, canvas bags bulging at her sides. Even from 50 yards away, Luca could see how she moved, careful, deliberate, like someone carrying something fragile. Something precious. She descended the concrete steps and limped toward her scooter, that beaten-down red Vespa that sputtered and wheezed like a dying animal every time she kick-started it. Someone had followed her inside. A figure in a dark hoodie, face obscured. They exchanged words Luca could not hear through the rain. An envelope passed. Then she disappeared into the warehouse again, alone. "Boss, you want me to grab her?" Vinny's voice was low, gravelly, a man who had asked this question 100 times before and received 100 different answers depending on the mood of the man beside him. Luca's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "No. We could take her now. Find out who she's working for. Who she's selling to." I said no. His voice came out like thunder, solid and final. Vinny knew that tone. That tone meant the conversation was over before it started. But Luca's jaw was tight enough to break teeth. For 6 weeks, he had watched this delivery girl, this nobody with a beaten scooter and defiant eyes, save a street vendor's life. She had stepped between his men and some low-level drug pusher without hesitation, her voice steady despite her soaked clothes and trembling hands. He had been surveilling the vendor, believed him to be moving product for a rival organization. When Allara stepped in, something in Luca's chest had shifted. Something he did not recognize. Something cold and dangerous and entirely unwelcome. So he watched her. Every shift. Every delivery. Every moment her guard dropped. And for 3 weeks, those canvas bags had been telling him a different story. Allara kick-started the scooter. It coughed twice, then roared to life, the sound swallowed immediately by the rain. She pulled away from the curb, her small frame bent over the handlebars, and disappeared into the November night. Luca did not start the engine. He sat in the darkness, listening to the percussion of rain on metal, and let himself remember something he had spent 15 years trying to forget. He was 17 years old. The smell of copper and rain on pavement. His father bleeding out on the concrete behind Russo's Italian market on 5th Street, 3 bullets in his chest fired by men who wanted to send a message. And Luca, hiding behind a dumpster, watching it happen. Paralyzed. Unable to move. Unable to scream. His father's eyes finding him in the shadows for just a moment before the light went out of them forever. In that moment, Luca had learned the fundamental law of his world: betrayal has only one price. Death. Swift, certain, merciless. His father had been betrayed by someone close to him. A business partner who wanted his territory. A man Luca's father had trusted. And that betrayal cost him everything. Now, 32 years old, Luca had built an empire on the ashes of his father's death. He controlled half of Miami's underworld through discipline, loyalty, and the absolute certainty that anyone who crossed him would not live to make the same mistake twice. His men feared him. His rivals feared him. Even the police officers on his payroll feared him. He did not allow himself to fear anything. Until the delivery girl stepped between his guns and a street vendor without flinching. "She's going back to the shelter," Vinny said, watching the scooter disappear on the GPS tracker in his lap. "I know. The child. Emma. She's sick, boss. The Harbor View Shelter medical log shows." "I know." Luca's voice cut through the rain like a blade. He knew everything. He knew Allara worked 12-hour shifts for a delivery app, making barely minimum wage plus tips she rarely received. He knew she lived in a 300-square-foot room in the Harbor View shelter with her 6-year-old daughter Emma, who had congenital heart disease. He knew the surgery cost $65,000. He knew Allara had exactly $34 in her bank account as of 8 hours ago. He knew because he had paid someone in the shelter's administration to tell him. Just like he had paid someone at the hospital to give him the medical records. Just like he had paid someone to track her GPS, follow her movements, document every moment of her days and nights. What he did not know was why he cared. What he did not know was why watching her suffer was beginning to feel like watching his father bleed out all over again. "You think she's working for the Castellano family?" Vinny asked carefully. The Castellano family controlled cocaine distribution across South Florida. They had been pushing into Luca's territory for months, feeding them information. Luca's silence was answer enough. But even as he considered it, something in him rebelled against the thought. The Allara he had watched did not move like a spy. She moved like someone drowning, paddling frantically just to keep her head above water long enough to breathe one more time. The scooter's taillights disappeared into the rain. "I need to know what's in those bags," Luca said finally. "I can pull her over. Make it look random. Check her bike." "No. If she is working for someone, that would expose the surveillance. We wait. We watch. We find out who she meets in that warehouse, and then he stopped. He was about to say eliminate them. That had always been his answer. That was always his solution. Threat identified, threat removed. But something about those canvas bags, stuffed full and carried with such care, made him hesitate. Vinny did not push. He had learned long ago that Luca Russo did not explain himself. He simply decided, and the world bent to accommodate his will. They sat in the darkness as the rain continued its relentless percussion against the windshield. Somewhere across the city, Allara Hartley was returning to that small shelter room where her daughter slept, unaware that a man with the power to reshape reality was deciding her fate. Unaware that for the first time in 15 years, the most dangerous man in Miami was questioning whether the fundamental law of his world, betrayal requires death, might not be the whole truth. But what neither of them could have predicted, what neither Luca nor Allara could have possibly imagined, was that those canvas bags carried medicine. Prescription antibiotics and cardiac medication that Allara had been stealing from the hospital where her cousin worked the night shift, risking her freedom to pay for Emma's prescriptions when the insurance company denied coverage. She was not betraying Luca Russo. She was saving her daughter's life. The mistake was already in motion. The gears were already turning. And in exactly 6 days, Margaret Harrington would see opportunity in Allara's desperation, and Robert Hargrove would tighten his fist, and the walls would begin to close in. But not yet. For now, the rain fell on Miami, and Luca Russo sat in darkness, and Allara Hartley held her daughter while she slept, and none of them knew that everything was about to change. Now let us go back. 6 weeks earlier. To the day when Allara Hartley had $34 to her name and 7 days until her daughter's surgery was scheduled to happen without payment. 7 days until Emma's world ended, or until something transformed completely. The morning began like every other morning, cold, dark, desperate. Allara's alarm did not ring at 4:30. It screamed. Her phone vibrated against the plastic nightstand in the 300-square-foot room she shared with her daughter at the Harbor View shelter, the shelter that had become her home after Robert Hargrove evicted her from the apartment she could not afford anymore. She silenced the alarm and lay still for a moment, listening to Emma's breathing in the narrow bed across the room. Steady. Even. The way her breathing should always be, if the universe was just. If the universe cared at all about 6-year-old girls with hole in their hearts. The room was cold. The Harbor View's heating system had been broken since September, and it was now November, and nobody had fixed it. Allara pulled the thin blanket tighter and counted the money in her wallet one more time, though she had counted it 1,000 times before. $34. She had $34. And 7 days. And a surgery that cost $65,000 that she did not have, could never have, would never have in the time remaining. The math was simple. The math was impossible. She stood up carefully, moving silently through the darkness so as not to wake Emma. The little girl slept with her stuffed rabbit, the one Allara had stitched together from scraps of fabric years ago when Emma was born. Mr. Whiskers, she called him, though he had no whiskers anymore, just a thin line of thread where they used to be. Allara pulled on the clothes she had worn yesterday. Black pants, grey shirt with the Dine Quick logo starting to fade. She braided her dark hair while looking in the mirror, seeing not her own face but her mother's face looking back at her, the same sharp cheekbones, the same defiant eyes, the same exhaustion that had aged her face into something that belonged on a woman 20 years older. She was 28 years old and looked like 45. The scooter was parked outside in the shelter's lot, under the flickering sodium light that attracted insects the size of thumbs. She had bought it 3 years ago for $200 from a man whose business had failed. The man had wept while she handed over the money. She remembered thinking that at least one of them could cry about it. She threw her leg over the seat and kick-started the engine. It coughed. It wheezed. It roared to something resembling life, spitting exhaust into the cold Miami morning. The first delivery of the day was a hotel breakfast to a businessman in a glass tower downtown. She wheeled her scooter through traffic that treated her like an obstacle, invisible, not worth acknowledging. Cars swerved around her. Trucks passed close enough that the wind nearly knocked her off the road. By the time she reached the hotel, her hands were shaking. The businessman did not tip. He looked at her scooter, at her rain-soaked clothes, at her trembling hands, and handed her the food back. "This is cold. I ordered this 45 minutes ago. I want a refund." Allara's voice came out soft, barely a whisper. "I came as fast as I could. Traffic was. I do not care about traffic. I care about cold food. Call your dispatcher. Tell her to refund me or I will dispute it with Dine Quick directly." She called the dispatcher. The dispatcher, a woman named Sharon who had never learned Allara's name in 2 years of employment, told her that disputes were the driver's responsibility. The customer was always right. Allara would have to absorb the cost. That was $32 gone. Just like that. A delivery that never existed. Money that had never existed. She now had $2 left. Not $2 and change. $2 exactly. It was 8 in the morning. She had 14 hours of her shift left to work. The scooter's fuel gauge was hovering just above empty. $2 exactly. That was all Allara Hartley had left in her pocket at 8 in the morning on that November day in Miami, and the scooter's fuel gauge was hovering just above empty like a threat that would not go away. She sat on the curb outside a closed diner on Collins Avenue, her soaked delivery uniform clinging to her skin, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she had not paid for. The cafe owner had given it to her. He knew her from the shelter line. He knew what $2 meant. She counted the tips from her first 4 deliveries of the day inside her head because counting on her fingers made it too real. Nothing, 75 cents, $1.50, and that one businessman in the glass tower who had handed the cold pad thai back to her without even looking at her face. $32 gone in one moment. A delivery that never existed. Money that had never existed. Her phone buzzed. A new delivery request. She stood, legs aching, and climbed back onto the scooter. The engine coughed twice before it roared into something resembling life, spitting exhaust into air that smelled like rain and rust and something else she could not name. Traffic swallowed her whole. Cars swerved around her. A truck passed so close the wind nearly knocked her sideways into a storm drain. By the time she reached the apartment building on North Beach, her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. $4.32. That was the tip the woman left on the counter. Allara's fingers trembled as she picked up the bills. The scooter took her next through downtown, where glass towers caught the November light and threw it back at the world like a challenge. Every delivery that afternoon blurred into the next. The businessman who did not answer his door but marked her as arrived anyway, costing her the tip. The elderly woman who ordered 3 meals and could only afford to give her $1 for all of them. The restaurant owner who tried to pay her directly instead of through the app, offering her $15 under the table if she would not report the order. She refused. She could not afford to lose her Dine Quick account. Dine Quick was everything. By 4 o'clock, the fuel warning light came on in red. Allara knew she had maybe 10 miles left in the tank. She needed that fuel to last until her shift ended at 11 p.m. That gave her 7 hours. 14 more deliveries if she was fast. If she was very fast. If people tipped her more than $1. The rain came down heavier then, turning the streets into rivers of neon and darkness. Her clothes were soaked through. Her hair hung in strings across her face. She did not feel cold anymore. She had moved past cold into something else, something numb, something like the bottom of a well where no light reached. She thought about Emma asleep in room 3B of Harbor View Shelter, Emma with her small blue lips and her small brave heart that was failing, 1 beat at a time, inside her small brave chest. Dr. Martinez had said 7 days. 7 days until Emma would need the valve replacement surgery. $65,000. The number lived in Allara's mind like a curse that could not be erased, like a weight attached to her ankles, like a blade through everything she tried to build. She had $2.17 left. The scooter's tank was nearly empty. Emma needed valve replacement surgery. The numbers did not connect. They lived in different worlds, mathematics that could not touch each other. At 6:30, the rain stopped all at once, like someone had turned off a faucet. The streets of Miami emerged wet and gleaming, neon signs reflecting off the asphalt in streaks of red and blue and gold. Allara took a delivery to an address on Collins Avenue, a restaurant order for a hotel in the Wynwood Arts District. As she walked back toward her scooter, securing the empty delivery bag, she heard a voice from the alley. A man's voice. Then another. Then the sound of something heavy hitting the brick wall. She turned toward the sound. In the alley between the restaurant and a closed flower shop, 3 men in designer jackets stood around an elderly man with a flower cart. The old man's name was Eduardo. She had seen him on these streets before, always smiling, always selling the flowers nobody wanted to buy. His cart was metal and rusted and held dahlias in purple and white, carnations in shades of pink, roses that had been beautiful maybe 3 days ago. One of the men, tall and young with the face of someone who had never been told no in his entire life, shoved Eduardo hard against the brick wall. "You saw nothing tonight, old man. Or your granddaughter learns what happens to snitches. What happens to people who talk to the wrong people. You understand me?" Eduardo nodded, trembling like a leaf in hurricane wind. The young man, who wore a watch that probably cost more than Allara's entire year of rent, stepped back to admire his own power. He looked at the other 2 men as if to say, "Did you see how easily I did that? Did you see how small and powerless he is?" Allara's hand shook but her voice came out steady. Like a blade wrapped in ice. "Leave him alone." All 3 men turned toward her at once. The young man smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been offered new entertainment. "The delivery girl wants to play hero." He stepped toward her, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. "You know what I love about this neighborhood? Everyone minds their own business. Everyone knows to keep their mouth shut. And then sometimes a girl with a broken scooter thinks she is Saint Teresa or something and decides to get involved in grown men's business." Allara did not move. She did not back away. Something in her chest, some small hard thing that had kept her alive through 28 years of falling, would not let her back away. "Her name is Elena," the young man continued, pulling out his phone. "She goes to school on 10th Street. Very pretty little girl. Very innocent. It would be a shame if something happened to her. It would be a real tragedy." Then the young man's phone rang. His face changed. All the cruelty drained out of it like water from a broken cup. He answered with one word, "Yes, sir." He listened. His hand started to shake. "Yes, sir." "No, sir." "I understand, sir." He hung up. He looked at his two friends. Without another word, all three of them walked away from the alley, moving fast, disappearing into the Miami night. Eduardo sank down on the curb beside his flower cart, breathing like he had been running for miles. Allara stood in the alley for a long moment, rain dripping from the ends of her hair, trying to understand what she had just seen. Something had stopped them. Something had pulled them back from the edge of whatever they were about to do. She did not know that across the street, in the shadows beside a black Mercedes so expensive that every polished surface looked like a mirror, a man named Luca Russo stood watching her with an intensity that could have burned through steel. She did not know that he had just called his rival's nephew and told him, voice like thunder, like an oath carved into stone, "Touch her and I will bury you beside your uncle." She did not know that Luca had been following that particular delivery girl for weeks, ever since the night she had stepped between armed men and a street vendor without hesitation, without fear, with only a voice like a blade and eyes that refused to look away. What changed everything was not Allara knowing any of this. What changed everything was that Luca Russo had made a decision in that moment, standing in the shadows, watching her catch Eduardo's arm and help the old man to his feet. He had decided that she would live. That she would be safe. That he would make sure of it, no matter what it cost him. And that decision would cost him everything. The rain fell sideways through the Miami night, wind carrying the smell of salt water and rotting food from the dumpsters behind the Fontaine Hotel. Allara Hartley sat in the leather chair of Luca Russo's penthouse, her wet delivery uniform clinging to her ribs like a second skin, her cheek still burning red from Margaret Harrington's hand. The view stretched 40 stories above the streets where she pedaled her broken scooter for $12 an hour. Down there, in that tangle of neon and darkness, was Emma. Always Emma. Luca sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than 3 months of her rent. A gold watch caught the city light on his wrist. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone made him look like a man who had survived things that should have killed him. "Tell me about the warehouse," he said. Allara's hands tightened around the tea mug. The ceramic felt warm, safe. Everything else felt like a trap waiting to spring. "Which warehouse?" she whispered. "The one on the docks. The one you visit at 2 in the morning with canvas bags." Luca's voice carried no accusation. It sounded like he already knew everything, like he was just waiting to hear her lie. "The one where you exchange bags with a man I have not yet identified." Her chest seized. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like Luca Russo did not help girls like her without knowing exactly what they were doing. "I collect aluminum cans," Allara said. The words came out smaller than she intended. "Bottles, too. I dig through restaurant dumpsters after closing time. The warehouse buys them by the pound. I make maybe $40 on a good night." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Vinny and Pietro stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain hammer the glass. They exchanged a look. After 15 years working for Luca Russo, they knew the specific gravity of his moods. This one was new. This one was dangerous in a way they had never seen before. "You have been digging through trash," Luca said slowly, "to pay for your daughter's surgery." "Yes." Allara lifted her eyes to his. "Because I have been rejected by 12 hospitals. Because the insurance company said her condition was a pre-existing situation and denied the claim. Because I have $34 in my account and Emma has 5 days left before the surgical window closes and her valve degenerates past the point where repair is possible." She did not tell him about the night she sat in the hospital waiting room holding Emma's small hand, listening to the cardiologist explain that without surgery, her daughter's heart would eventually fail. She did not tell him that Emma was 6 years old and already understood that her mother was afraid. Children knew things. They could taste fear like metal in the air. "Why did you step between those men in the alley?" Luca asked. The question seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, a place he rarely let anyone see. "Because someone had to." You did not know me. You did not know what I was. No, Allara said. But I knew what he was. A man trying to feed his family. And I knew that the men with guns were going to hurt him if nobody stopped them. Luca stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him like a living thing, breathing rain and exhaust, pulsing with the lives of millions of people fighting to survive. His father had died in those streets 23 years ago. Shot twice in the back outside a restaurant where he was supposed to pick up money from a local business owner. Luca had been 17. He had been waiting in a car 3 blocks away. Since that night, Luca had built an empire on a simple principle: anyone who threatened what he valued would be eliminated. His father's killer had taken 7 months to find. When Luca found him, the man had begged. Luca let him beg for a long time before ending it. But this girl, Allara, had done something his father never managed. She had refused to be afraid. "I will pay for the surgery," Luca said without turning from the window. The mug dropped from Allara's hands. It shattered on the marble floor, tea spreading in a dark stain. She did not move to clean it. "No." The word came out rough. "I do not accept charity. I do not." She stopped, realizing she had no idea what he was. "What is it that you do, exactly? Things that would horrify you. Then why would you help me?" Luca turned back to face her. The scar on his face seemed deeper in the penthouse lighting, like a map of violence. "Because the people who slapped you across the face, the people who said you did not belong in that lobby, the people who deny your daughter surgery because their computers say no, they believe you are nobody. And in my world, when someone believes you are nobody, that belief needs to be corrected." Allara rose from the chair on shaking legs. "If I accept this, if you pay for the surgery, what do you want from me?" "Nothing you cannot give. People like you do not give $65,000 for nothing. That is not how the world works." Luca's expression softened in a way that made Vinny grip Pietro's arm without meaning to. In 15 years, neither man had ever seen their boss look at anyone with gentleness. The world works however the strongest person decides it works. "I have decided it works like this: you get your daughter's surgery. You keep her alive. You do not owe me anything. I will pay you back. Every dollar. Even if it takes 20 years. Deal," Luca said. But what Allara could not see in that moment was the calculation happening behind Luca's eyes. She did not know that he had been watching her for weeks. She did not know that his men had photographed Emma through the hospital window, that he had read her medical file, that he had already arranged the transfer and then cancelled it because he knew she would refuse. She did not know that what he wanted from her was not money or favors, but the thing that had been hollowed out of him since his father died, proof that goodness still existed in the world. At 2 in the morning, Margaret Harrington sat in her downtown high-rise apartment, nursing a glass of wine that cost more than Allara made in a week. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through her phone, reading the termination notice Luca had sent to the hotel owner. Banned from every property he had interest in. Margaret had built her social position over 15 years. Luca had destroyed it in 15 minutes. She made a phone call. Robert Hargrove answered on the first ring, his voice like gravel. "Yeah?" "It is me," Margaret said. "I have a job for you. There is a girl. Her name is Allara Hartley. She lives at the Harbor View shelter with a 6-year-old daughter. The girl has been stealing from people. Defaulting on debts. I want her destroyed." Silence on the line. "Then, this is personal." "Very. All right. I know her. I own some of her debts. I can work with this." Margaret hung up and poured another glass of wine. Allara Hartley had no idea what she had started by accepting help from Luca Russo. Nobody refused Margaret Harrington and walked away intact. The next morning, October rain still falling, Allara left the hospital after Emma's pre-surgery appointment. The cardiologist had reviewed her chart one final time. Everything was ready. The surgery was scheduled for 4 days from now. Emma would live. Emma would have a normal heart, a normal life, the kind of future Allara had been terrified she would never see. A black SUV pulled up beside her as she reached the bus stop. The driver's window lowered. Robert Hargrove's scarred face appeared, his breath reeking of cigarette smoke and coffee. "Hello, Allara," he said. His smile showed too many teeth. "I heard you found a sugar daddy. Luca Russo, right? That is impressive. That is real impressive for a girl like you." Allara's entire body went cold. "Leave me alone, Robert. See, I cannot do that. Because I own your daughter's medical debt. $42,000 from when she was in NICU. And unless you sign over custody to me so I can collect the state foster payments, I am going to make sure that surgery scheduled for 4 days from now never happens. I will have her pulled from pre-op. I will have CPS at the shelter within an hour. I will bury your daughter so deep in the system that you will not see her again until she is 18. He said it all with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. Allara's hand went to her jacket pocket, to the small leather shoe she had carried since the day Emma was born. Emma's first shoe, so tiny it fit in her palm. It was the only thing she owned that mattered. It was the only proof that her daughter had ever existed outside of the hospital walls. "What do you want?" Allara asked. "I want you to understand something, girl. Luca Russo is a kind man only to people who belong to him. And you? You will never belong to him. In his world, everyone is expendable. Everyone betrays everyone eventually. So here is my offer, sign the papers making me Emma's legal guardian, and I will make sure that surgery goes forward. I will even pay for it myself. Your daughter gets to live. You get to visit her on weekends. Everyone wins." Allara did not move. She did not speak. "You have 24 hours to decide," Robert said. "After that, CPS gets a call about a mother who abandoned her 6-year-old to work drug runs for a mafia boss. And we both know how that ends." The SUV pulled away, leaving Allara standing in the rain, the bus arriving behind her, people pushing past her without seeing her at all. She was nobody again. A girl in a wet jacket, dripping on the sidewalk, invisible to the world. The hospital roof was empty except for the rain and the wind that came off the Atlantic like a blade wrapped in ice. Allara Hartley stood at the edge, her clothes soaked through, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the wet metal railing. 7 floors below, Miami spread out in neon smears through the downpour. Emergency lights. Traffic. People going home to families, to warm apartments, to lives that made sense. 7 floors down, Emma slept in room 412, monitors beeping in steady rhythm, unaware that her mother was breaking. The November rain hammered against her face. She had been standing here for 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Time had stopped being real somewhere around the moment Robert Hargrove drove away, his words still echoing like a curse that could not be erased. "Sign the papers making me Emma's legal guardian. 24 hours to decide. After that, CPS gets a call about a mother who abandoned her daughter to work drug runs for a mafia boss. She could not win against people like Margaret and Robert. She had no money. No power. No family. No one in the world who would fight for her. She had a job that paid $12 an hour. She had $34 in her jacket pocket. She had a tiny leather shoe in that same pocket, so worn at the heel that the stitching was coming loose. Emma's first shoe, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. It was the only thing she owned that mattered. The only proof that her daughter had ever existed outside of hospital walls. Maybe Emma would be better off without her. That thought arrived like a knife through her heart. Her fingers loosened on the railing. The void below pulled at her like gravity, like the sky was collapsing, like the rain was drowning the entire city and she was the only one still awake to watch it happen. Then, through the rain and the wind and the sound of her own breaking, she heard it. A child's laugh from the pediatric ward below. High and bright and uncomplicated. Some other mother's child, somewhere in the darkness, laughing at something small and ordinary. It sounded like Emma. Not exactly like Emma's laugh, but close enough. Close enough to shatter the void. Allara's hands gripped the railing so hard her nails cut into her palms. She thought of the promise she had whispered to Emma the night they first came to the shelter. The promise made when her daughter was so small she fit against her mother's chest like a heartbeat. I will never let anyone take you. I will keep you safe. I will love you until the stars fall out of the sky. She had failed at everything else. She would not fail at this. Allara turned away from the edge and walked back inside. Her clothes dripped on the tile floor. Her legs moved like they belonged to someone else. But she was alive. And Emma was alive 7 floors below, sleeping. She did not know what happened next. What she did not know was that Luca Russo had been building a case for 48 hours straight without sleeping, without stopping, without rest. When Allara called him in tears and told him what Robert had said, something cold and dangerous had stirred in his chest. A line had been crossed. A boundary that existed even in his world had been violated. You did not threaten a man's woman. You did not threaten her child. You did not come to a man's territory and speak of taking what belonged to him. At the exact moment Allara was turning away from the hospital roof, Luca was sitting in the basement of a warehouse on the Miami River, watching Vinny and Pietro pull files from encrypted servers. Financial records that told a story. Robert Hargrove had been operating a scheme for 7 years. He identified families with sick children, positioned himself as their landlord or creditor, and then tightened the noose. He had targeted over 300 families. 300 mothers like Allara. 300 children like Emma. Margaret Harrington's name appeared in every file. Her signature on documents. Her directives in emails. She was not just complicit. She was the architect. She had orchestrated Robert's debt collection scheme while simultaneously feeding information to FBI agent Torres about Luca's operations in exchange for immunity for her husband's police corruption. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone outside that room knew. Luca's hands were steady when he looked at the photographs of the families Robert had destroyed. His voice was flat and quiet when he spoke to Vinny and Pietro. Make sure Agent Chen has everything by dawn. The other investigation. The one that matters. Agent Chen did not work for Torres. Agent Chen did not take Margaret Harrington's money. Vinny nodded and walked away to make phone calls. The rain continued outside. Somewhere in the city, Allara was standing in a pediatric hallway, dripping wet, watching her daughter sleep through a window. Somewhere in a penthouse, Margaret Harrington was pouring herself a glass of wine, confident that the FBI raid at the warehouse would neutralize Luca's operation, confident that her deal with Torres was airtight, confident that she had won. She had no idea that the raid itself was theater. That dawn came gray and cold. The FBI arrived at the waterfront warehouse in 12 black SUVs, agents in tactical gear moving like ghosts. News cameras were already there, reporters standing in the rain with microphones. Torres herself stood at the perimeter, smiling, believing this was the beginning of her own advancement. Inside the warehouse, Vinny and Pietro were waiting. They stood with their hands visible, weapons already removed, surrender already prepared. When the agents came through the doors, the 2 men simply knelt. No resistance. No drama. Just the quiet acceptance of men who knew exactly what was about to happen. Torres watched it, her smile fading slightly. Something was wrong. But it was too late to understand what. At that same moment, 3 blocks away at the Harrington penthouse, Agent Chen led a different raid. 12 agents in tactical gear. A different wardrobe from Torres's unit. A different mandate. They did not have Luca's files. They had something better. They had Margaret's own. Robert Hargrove was pulled from his office on the 20th floor by agents who did not care about his credentials or his connections or the badge his wife carried. They cuffed him on the sidewalk in front of the building where he worked, where everyone could see. A reporter shoved a microphone toward his face. News cameras caught every angle of his collapse. "Please," he said, his voice breaking like old glass. She made me do it. Margaret Harrington planned everything. I was just trying to survive. An agent pushed him into a patrol car. His forehead cracked against the frame. He did not flinch. He was already broken. Margaret was arrested in the lobby of the Fontaine Hotel. The same lobby where she had slapped Allara. The same space where she had stood in her $5,000 dress and called a desperate mother a thief. Agent Chen stood in front of her with the warrants, reading charges in a voice that carried across the entire lobby. Conspiracy. Embezzlement from 3 separate charities. Obstruction of justice. Witness tampering. The charges stacked like dominoes. Margaret's face went white. Her lips moved but nothing came out at first. Then, do you know who I am? My husband is a decorated detective with the Miami Police Department. You cannot possibly. Your husband is in a car 3 blocks away, Chen said quietly. He gave us everything 2 hours ago. Margaret's legs buckled. Agents caught her arms before she fell. They led her out through the lobby where her friends were gathering, where the people she had laughed with and performed for were filming on their phones. She moved like a puppet with its strings cut, like a woman watching her own life from the outside. By noon, every news channel in Miami was running the story. By evening, the networks had picked it up. By the end of the week, the entire country was watching the downfall of Margaret Harrington and Robert Hargrove. 217 families came forward. 311. More kept calling. Each one had a story. Each one had a sick child. Each one had been threatened, squeezed, destroyed by the machinery that Margaret and Robert had built together. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Robert received a 40-year federal prison sentence. Margaret received 25 years plus asset forfeiture. Everything she owned, the penthouse, the cars, the jewelry, the charity account she had stolen from, all of it seized. Her social empire collapsed overnight like a house of cards in a strong wind. Death would have been too quick for them. Too easy. Too merciful. Prison was better. Public shame was better. Losing everything was better. What the news cameras did not see was what happened at the FBI field office later that same week. Agent Torres arriving for a routine briefing and being escorted by internal affairs investigators instead. Files on her desk. Recordings on headsets. Margaret Harrington's voice on those recordings, making promises. Torres had been part of the conspiracy all along, had traded her integrity for immunity that would never come. By the time she realized what Luca had done, she was already finished. He had known Torres would bite at the bait. He had known Margaret would try to use her. He had known that the truth, once released into the world, would devour everyone it touched. 3 days after Margaret's arrest, Allara sat in Emma's hospital room while her daughter slept, a surgical mask on the small face, bandages wrapped around the tiny chest. The surgery had been successful. The surgeon had walked out of the operating room with good news. Emma's heart was strong. Emma would live. A nurse came in with discharge papers and a folder. "Your daughter is going to be okay," she said. "Recovery will take time, but she'll be okay." Allara nodded, unable to speak. The leather shoe was still in her pocket. Still small. Still worn. Still proof that everything she had fought for was real. She did not know yet about the anonymous fund that had been created. The one that paid off her shelter debt, her hospital bills, all of it. The one that had $47,000 remaining to use for Emma's recovery care. Luca would tell her eventually. But not today. Today he was in a different kind of hospital. A federal one. Serving time for crimes the FBI could prove but not the ones he had actually committed. The cost of justice, he would tell her later, was always paid by someone. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. And love, true love, always knows the price it will have to pay. Emma's surgical mask covered most of her small face, but her eyes were open and aware. The machines beeped steadily, heart rate holding, Oxygen saturation climbing, vitals stabilizing. Dr. Martinez had walked out of the operating room 6 hours and 12 minutes after he walked in, his surgical cap still on his head, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Allara remembered his exact words because she had replayed them 17 times in her mind. The valve replacement was successful. Her heart is strong. Very strong. Emma is going to have a normal life. The leather shoe sat in Allara's lap. Small. Worn. The one she had kept since the shelter, since that impossible night when she had $34 and Emma had a hole in her heart the size of a dime. She did not hear the door open. She did not see him until his reflection appeared in the darkened window beside Emma's bed. Luca Russo, still in the charcoal suit he had worn to the courthouse where he had watched Margaret Harrington get arrested on live television, but now his jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and something fragile had broken open behind his dark eyes. "She will wake up hungry," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Children always do after surgery." Allara turned. He stood at the threshold as if crossing it would shatter something irreplaceable. In 15 months, she had learned to read the small movements of his hands, the slight tightening of his jaw. He was holding something back. "How did you?" "I called the hospital. They would not tell me anything. So I came." He came. Not sent someone. Not ordered someone. Came himself to a public hospital in Miami where federal agents could have been waiting, where his face on security cameras would create 1,000 complications. He came because a 7-year-old girl in that bed was alive, and that was his doing as much as hers. "They are releasing her tomorrow," Allara said. "Full recovery expected. The surgeon said she could run, play, do anything other children do." Luca stepped into the room. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum. He looked at Emma's sleeping face, pale but peaceful, the bandages white against her small chest, her breathing easy and unlabored, and something in his expression shifted. For just a moment, he looked like a man who had been carrying an impossible weight and finally set it down. "The fund is established," he said. "The one that paid for the surgery, the hospital bills, everything. There is $47,000 remaining. It is in her name, in trust, for education or medical care or anything she needs." Allara's hands tightened on the small shoes. "Luca, I cannot accept." "You are not accepting it from me." His eyes met hers. "You are accepting it as a reminder that what happened to you and to her was not your fault. That you did not deserve it. That there are people in this world who will burn their own life down to make sure it never happens again." The machines beeped. Emma breathed. Rain began to fall outside the hospital window, tapping against the glass like small urgent hands. "They are going to come for you," Allara whispered. "Agent Torres, the federal investigation. They will not stop. I know. You could fight it. With your lawyers, your money, your... The trial would take years." His voice was steady, like someone who had already made peace with an unavoidable truth. "Years where a target would stay on you and Emma. Years where Robert Hargrove's allies could still reach you from prison. Years where you could never be safe." He walked to the window and stood beside her, looking out at the rain-soaked Miami streets below. The neon signs reflected in the puddles like fractured light. "My father died on streets like those," Luca said quietly. "When I was 17. Rivals came, guns came, and no one helped him. So I spent 15 years building an empire on the idea that strength meant no one could touch you. That power meant safety. I was wrong." He turned to face her. "You taught me what real strength is. Standing between men with guns when you have nothing. Keeping your daughter alive on $34. Choosing to love when every reason to hate was handed to you on a blood-stained platter. That is what safety actually looks like." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am going to turn myself in. Tomorrow morning. 12 months, federal protective custody, charges that will stick and keep my men safe. It is the right price." Allara felt something fracture inside her chest. "No. Luca, no. You cannot. I can. I am. He reached out and touched her face where Margaret Harrington's hand had left bruises weeks ago, bruises that had faded to nothing. Because you reminded me what I was supposed to protect, and I have been protecting the wrong things for 15 years. This is my choice. This is my becoming something other than what I was. He left before she could speak. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor, and then there was only the rain and the machines and Emma breathing steadily in her bed. The next morning, Luca Russo walked into the federal detention center as the sun rose over Biscayne Bay. Vinny and Pietro watched their boss, the man who had built an empire on vengeance and ruled through fear, surrender himself to agents in dark suits. They watched him place his gold watch on the processing table, his silver rings, his leather coat. They watched him disappear into a system designed to hold men like him. 11 months later, he walked out early for cooperation and good behavior. The time between dissolved into a blur of recovery. Emma's laugh came back gradually, then all at once, bright and constant. Her color improved. Her energy exploded. Allara enrolled in nursing school using the anonymous fund for tuition. She worked nights at Miami General, studied during the day, and built something from the rubble of her old life. The apartment had heat. The refrigerator had food. Emma slept without nightmares. Twice, Allara found envelopes with cash, $500, $1,000, when rent threatened to overwhelm her. Always unsigned. Always from a friend. She saved every dollar she could spare, determined to repay him someday. November came again. Rain fell on Miami like a benediction. Allara stood at a penthouse window overlooking the same streets where this had all begun, not Luca's penthouse, but one she had earned through promotion to head surgical nurse. Her own place. Her own view. Emma, now 7 years old and healthy, slept in the bedroom beyond, her breathing easy, her future open. The small worn shoe sat on the windowsill, a relic of impossible poverty and impossible grace. She heard the door open behind her. Luca's reflection appeared in the rain-streaked glass. He was thinner than she remembered, lined with a hardness that prison had carved deeper, but his eyes were clear in a way they had never been when he was building an empire on darkness. "You should not be here," Allara said without turning. "Your parole conditions. I violated them the moment I thought about you in 12 months of protective custody." His voice was exactly as she remembered. "I had to come. I had to tell you something I have carried since the moment I saw you stand between those men with nothing but courage and a broken heart." They moved to the balcony. Rain misted around them, cold and clean. The city lights blurred into halos below. "I watched my father die when I was 17, Luca said. Watched him bleed on pavement while powerful men walked away. So I spent 15 years becoming so powerful that no one could ever do that to me again. But power cannot drive out violence. Only something else can do that." He stepped closer. "When I saw you with Marco's men, when I learned about Emma, when I realized that you were so desperate you were willing to trade your body to save your child's life, something broke in me. The part that was all vengeance and empire and machinery. You broke it. You rebuilt it into something that looked like a man instead of a weapon." Tears traced down Allara's face. "You sacrificed everything for us?" "No." He reached out and took her hand. "I sacrificed my life for myself. I sacrificed it to stop being a ghost in an expensive suit, walking through rooms full of people I had paid to fear me. You did not save me from punishment. You saved me from non-existence. What happens now? Now I am asking if you will let me build something different." His dark eyes held hers. "Not an empire. Not something built on fear. Just a life. With you and Emma. If you can forgive me for what I was." Before Allara could answer, the bedroom door opened. Emma emerged, rubbing her eyes, still half asleep in her pink pajamas. She saw Luca and stopped. "Are you the man from the hospital?" Emma asked. "I am. Thank you for letting me be alive." Emma's voice was small and matter-of-fact. Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I am sleeping. But she stopped after you helped. I like that better. Luca knelt to Emma's level. His hands, which had ordered 1,000 violent things, were gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. You are very brave. Like your mother. Will you stay? He looked at Allara. The question hung between them, not just the 7-year-old's question, but the larger one underneath. Will you stay? Will you choose this life? Will you choose us? If your mother will let me, Luca said. Allara reached down and took his hand. She pulled him to his feet, and for the first time, she let him see everything, the love and fear and hope and the desperate desire to believe that darkness could genuinely end. That two broken people could stand in the rain and be made whole. Stay, she whispered. Emma wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood together on that balcony overlooking the same rain-soaked streets where everything had started. The delivery girl with $34. The mafia boss with an empire of ash. The child whose life was a miracle paid in sacrifice. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. And love, true love, always knows the price it will have to pay. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe so you never miss the moment when the powerful discover that the powerless hold all the power. Hit that notification bell. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.